Hey, today I'm going to be covering another PAX2 video. I'm going to be covering the video he made on the French Revolution and Napoleon. And the video may be a little old, but the reason I'm covering it is because I've been watching a lot of things recently related to the French Revolution and Napoleon and reading on it more than I usually do because of the new Napoleon movie that came out with Joaquin Phoenix, which I really loved, though not everybody agrees, I know. But I think it was a great movie and I think you should watch it. But anyways, that's why I'm in a mood to talk about this right now. Um, and something kind of dawned on me when I was watching these PAX 2 videos as to why they irritate me. It reminds me of another video series that I did not long ago about Barack Lurie in the book Atheism Kills, which very often will misrepresent historical truths and mix fact with fiction to make a point about how evil atheism is, by misrepresenting atheism as being the cause of some of the worst atrocities of communism, fascism, Nazism, the French Revolution, and then trying to say, well, see, this is why we can't have atheism in the world, and Christianity must control everything. And Pax Tube essentially does the same thing in his videos. He does so without, I guess, maybe actually not quite as bad as Barack Lurie does, but he does so in a way that's he has actually more extreme views than Barack Lurie, so that's also what makes his videos kind of interesting and also kind of more irritating. And a good example, to kind of start off and where I'm talking about it here is, the causal factors of the French Revolution. I'm not going to go very far with any of the points I'm making here because I'm not a historian and I'm not an expert on the French Revolution, but it's widely agreed some things of the causal factors of the French Revolution were the weakness of King Louis XVI. He was not a particularly effective leader, and weak kings can often precipitate revolutions. France had lost the war with England. France had been bankrolling the American Revolution, and thus it was very low on money. And there was a famine in France that further fueled already bad situation. There was a huge divide between the nobility and the clergy, as well as the working class and the middle class. These are all commonly accepted causes of the French Revolution. They're not anything overly, all you have to have is a basic knowledge of history to know that. And he acknowledges that in the early part of his video. But then he throws in, also, by the way, what caused it was that King Louis XV had begun to legalize prostitution and pornography in France. And this is also, what had led to moral decadence. And it had led to France being the least Christian it had ever been. Well, you don't have to be a scholar to recognize that A, that is an opinion being thrown in with facts, and B, it's an absurd opinion at that, because if that was the case, a lot of those things have remained, a lot of those things, such as pornography, prostitution, and what he defines as moral decadence, are in place in many parts of the world, and it rarely leads to violent revolutions, in fact, if ever. It's just in this particular circumstance, he is trying to tie them in with it because it fits his own bias. And again, some may say, well, this is just your opinion being thrown back the other way. Well, no, it's not. That's a fact. It is a fact that things like that don't lead to violent revolutions, whether or not you believe it was a positive or negative event, And it is very much his opinion, and a very absurd one at that, to try to throw in that it was. And he does this throughout his videos. Like I noticed in a video he made about colonization, he tries to throw in when he's talking about the good things that were brought over when colonizers came, such as certain technological advancements. And he talks about some of the raw materials that were brought in as well. And then he throws in monogamy as one of the technological advancements that was brought in. He just lists it, and he kind of sandwiches it in when he's listing it there, like it's not, as if that's hoping that people who are watching his videos are too biased to notice. That doesn't belong with the others. Even if you believe monogamy was a good thing, even if you believe colonization was a good thing, or the French, whatever you believe, it doesn't belong with the others, okay? It's a misrepresentation of facts in order to prove a point. And that's what he does here in this video, trying to list things that he believed were bad in France and listing them as causal factors of the French Revolution. Okay, it'd be no difference than if I said Christianity specifically caused the French Revolution because it had led to years of repression in France, and the French people were just so tired of it that they rose up, and that's why they had to attack and fight back. I don't know. You get where I'm going with this, that trying to say that something that is maybe my own personal opinion and my own bias is literally the fact and a factual and causal factor of something that it really wasn't. And another time he does this in the book is he skips over facts that are very crucial to understanding the French Revolution that fit his bias. Like when he says later on that King Louis and Marie Antoinette were fleeing for their safety from France. And then that enraged the French revolutionaries to the point of hysteria, and that's why they executed them. Well, no duh. I mean, they were the ruling monarchs of the country, and they had an obligation, whether or not it was in their own personal interest, to stay with the country and ride the ship. I mean, that for the sake of their people. Even if it had been for their own personal safety, it was an act of cowardice. And it very likely was to get foreign aid, because there were many, including the Austrians, that wanted to aid the Bourbon monarchy in being restored. So it was very obvious why the people saw this as an act of treason and then brought them back. But Pax Tube completely leaves that out. He completely leaves out and doesn't even really talk about why the French people, doesn't even remotely show the side of the people or the revolutionaries as to why and how still many didn't believe in executing King Louis XVI or his wife Marie Antoinette. But, he doesn't even begin to explore the implications of what their exit to France actually meant. He just portrays it as, once again, the poor king and queen just running from their life from the evil peasantry. And it's a gross misrepresentation of the facts and not including things that are very crucial to understanding what led to their actions at that time. I don't know if executing the king and queen was the right course of action, but one thing is for certain, at that point they probably deserved to be prisoners for life, because they had committed an act of treason. And when a king and queen do that, who are obligated to lead a people, they really do deserve to be punished pretty harshly. So, another time that he also leaves out some key facts at the end is, he starts talking about things like, he talks about how the Age of Enlightenment had led to the French Revolution. And to some extent, that's true. It led to the positive aspects of the French Revolution, or some of them, where they started trying to view people of all class, all race, and both genders as equal. Though, admittedly, not all people in the French Revolution were egalitarian on the issue of gender rights. But where I'm going with this is, he'll talk about, the evil idea, how before then we had the correct idea of seeing mankind as sinful, then we started to see mankind as good by the ideas of Rousseau, or John Maw, who saw mankind as a blank slate. And that's probably where I fall. I probably would agree more along the lines that mankind is a blank slate. I think our people vary incredibly widely in their behaviors based off the situations they're placed in and the individual people we're dealing with. Not all people are the same. Some people are very good in certain circumstances. Some people are very immoral. But it is actually factually very easy to disprove why mankind is not entirely sinful. All you have to do is look at the actions of people, such as in the French Revolution. A lot of people did everything they could to stop the violence on both sides, including the French revolutionaries who tried to stop the violence and tried to stop the terror. There are many instances in which people will be heroes and sacrifice their own well-being and good, and that includes the French Revolution. Many people were fighting on the frontier for the ideas of the French Revolution as soldiers and fighting and dying. But then there were people who were selfish, power-hungry. There were counter-revolutionaries who were violent, who were like the church and like the nobility, who were just looking to preserve their old feudalistic privileges, that were selfish and violent. It is an opinion, but it's a very easy one to prove that mankind is not entirely sinful. Also, I don't know if mankind's entirely good, but I'm not going to go that far with that one. And I think one great example is the person who rose out of the French Revolution himself, the biggest person of it all, Napoleon Bonaparte. He was not entirely good or entirely sinful. One can easily look at that in Napoleon's life. He committed many actions that were incredibly convoluted and very hard to decipher as either being pure good or pure bad. Like, his crushing of certain elements of the French Revolution and his promotion of other aspects of it, his wars that he executed, many of which were accomplished good things, such as, abolishing the Holy Roman Empire, such as spreading, more egalitarian and, abolishing feudalistic ideas in the countries that he conquered. But then on the same note, Napoleon was too aggressive and he was too willing to expend human lives for his goals. And the reason I'm using this is a perfect example of how complicated human nature is. Psychology has proved that as we've studied human nature more and more. We're not evil. but humans are not entirely good either. We're just, above all else, human psychology is complicated, and I'm not a psychologist, so that's all I can say. But it's very simple to prove why that's the case, you know. But of course, Pax 2 is of the idea, of the very traditional Catholic idea that mankind is inherently sinful, and the only one to solve that is the church. And of course, that works out very well for the church because that means you can never go against their ideas. But anyways, some other things that he talks about in this, he talks about positive freedom versus negative freedom. And I have honestly never heard that term before. That must be common amongst Catholics or something. He describes positive freedom as the ability to pursue virtue, which is he claims is the Christian way of viewing things, and negative freedom is the ability to do whatever you want as long as it doesn't harm anyone else, which is a very lopsided and biased way of looking at secular morality. To some extent, secular morality maybe is a little more laissez-faire, but you're free to pursue virtue with secular morality. You're free to pursue whatever you choose to some extent. The only difference is you don't have to seek the approval of the church to do it. You can use it's more based on reason, it's more based off of philosophy, it's more based off science, it's more based off history, whereas with the church it's more just based off do what we tell you to because we told you to do so. And if you don't, well, then you're a sinful person and you just want to do whatever you want. That is essentially positive freedom as he portrays it. I don't even know that I've heard the term positive freedom versus negative freedom, at least not in the way he talks about it, but that's one other philosophical idea he discusses in this. There's a number of other things he talks about in this, like he talks about how the Middle Ages had been just as scientifically, progressive as the Age of Enlightenment had. The only difference was in the Age of Enlightenment, we made the error of putting science and philosophy and reason above spirituality. Well, if that's an error, then I agree it was something they did. We started to prioritize those things above spirituality, meaning that they were prioritized above the church. And once again, that's my opinion, but I agree with it. And to be honest with you, in the modern world, most people would agree with it, unless you really honestly think the world was better off when the church had almost unlimited control over everything back in the Middle Ages. And he talks about how, there were scientists like, Sir Francis Bacon in the Middle Ages, and that's true. There was science, there was reason and philosophy, but it just was much slower and much lesser than in the Age of Enlightenment, But again, to a person who already agrees with his biases on these things, they'll probably listen to this and they'll be like, well, that's all true. Yeah, we had science and philosophy back then, but they're getting facts about it right while missing the big picture and excluding other facts. That's really kind of the problem with these videos. And another one, he talks about where he is, I guess, technically not lying, but he's being very misrepresentative. He calls the propaganda that arose in France, like about Louis XVI, political cartoons parodying him prior to the French Revolution and during it, political pornography. That's an interesting choice of words to describe it, but essentially all it was is just the ability to freely criticize your leaders using words or using images. I mean, they did portray like images of like Louis XVI with a head on a pig, and it was kind of weird looking and gross. And then Marie Antoinette, I think she was portrayed as like I can't remember exactly. It was like a badger or a tiger or something, because they viewed her as kind of a scheming like person, and they viewed Louis as just a fat slob, which he kind of was. But I mean, that's just freedom of speech. And once again, it's a very commonly accepted thing. I mean, there is such a thing as libel and, slander, and that's, it kind of depends a little on your opinion. But to be honest, it's a very commonly acknowledged thing, nowadays, that a part of a free country is the ability to say whatever you want about the leaders without having to worry about being sent to prison, and apparently Pax Tube disagrees with that, but, and people occasionally do abuse that right. And, some of the cartoons, I've seen them from back in those times, and some of them are kind of gross looking, it's true. But, honestly, that's freedom of speech, and if you disagree with it, again, there's not much I can say to you other than, well, we'll have to agree to disagree, because freedom of speech means you can criticize leaders, including saying things that sometimes aren't even true about them, But I guess then to kind of wrap it all up, he talks about how the end results of the French Revolution were about learning the value of temperance, of honor, I think he said, and why um, without Christian morality, we have no substitute for it. And obviously, once again, he's shoving something else in that doesn't belong with those things. Because he talks about after the French Revolution how France went into a sustained period of conservatism and peace reigned, and they slayed the Jabberwocky and everything was happy. Well, that's not true. Once again, he's leaving out a lot of facts there. France had another revolution years later. A lot of the changes of the French Revolution remained in place even once the monarchy was back in place. The monarchy was much more limited in its powers after this, and the reason there was sustained peace in Europe was not because of the French Revolution ending. It was because of the British essentially beating France in the Napoleonic Wars and gaining control over everything, after which the Pax Britannica became the result of for the 19th century. And I mean, there were some downsides to that as well, but at least the upside of what it was, yeah, that's all of Europe was at peace for a pretty long time. But it really, once again, was not tied to atheists losing and Christians winning in the French Revolution. It was tied to other factors. And the 19th century was not an era of sustained conservatism. As to whether or not it was more conservative than the 20th century or the 18th century, I can't say because I'm not a historian. But there were many atheistic thinkers that arose in the 19th century, such as Friedrich Nietzsche. There was a lot of countries that continued to liberalize and secularize. It was absolutely not an era of sustained conservatism. There was the Industrial Revolution, the Age of Enlightenment still continued into the French or into the 19th century. So no, it was not an era of plain political conservatism. And again, these are a little bit my opinions, but mostly these are just basic common facts. And if you don't agree and you think these are just my opinions that are the reverse of Pax Tube's opinions, I would recommend you just do a little basic research on history, because I don't think I should have to explain to you in certain ways why, the 19th century was not, I guess you could say the peace of the 19th century was not purely a product of the end of the French Revolution. That's a pretty basic amount. It's a very, very basic statement that really just needs a little bit of common sense. All you need to know is just basic things about the Pax Britannica to know that. All you need is basic common knowledge to know that the causes of the French Revolution were not the rise of pornography, prostitution, and Freemasonry. Or at least the violence of the French Revolution, that it had much more to do with a lot of other factors going on in France at the time. And, essentially what I'm not doing here is to make some great intellectual video about, why PaxTube is so poorly informed and why I'm so intelligent. This is just very basic history from someone who has a moderately strong knowledge of the French Revolution and of Napoleon Bonaparte, and basically picking apart, why he is inserting some things in this that really just don't belong, such as, trying to make atheism the sole cause of some of the worst acts of the French Revolution. And, also to wrap this up, one last thing, talking about Napoleon Bonaparte, he talks about Napoleon Bonaparte's mixed legacy after the French Revolution and a lot of his mixed relationship with the church, and that's very much true. He actually was mostly right in his portrayal of that. But he even tries to further, put his bias on that one in. Like, he focuses on some statements said by Napoleon at the end of his life and his exile in St. Helena, where he talked about how he wanted sacraments given to him and mass given to him, and how he seemed to be more congenial with the Pope at that phase of his life. Well, I mean, again, you're looking at a man who was living as a prisoner of the English military and the English government. He was no longer in power. He was a broken man. Napoleon did not age well. At the end of his life, he was psychologically and physically not doing so well. Being emperor of the world had taken its toll on him, and to try to portray him as having suddenly retreated into Christianity at the end of his life is kind of a misportrayal of the overall events of his life. He really didn't. I'm not going to focus much on that one, though. This is about the end of the video, because he really didn't go too far on that. But that was just kind of a mild, irritating thing that he put in on his video on Napoleon that I thought, did not portray him particularly well. But ultimately, that's, what I'm just here to talk about is some of the misinformation that was put in this. And like I said, one of the last things I want to close on was about Napoleon Bonaparte and how really throughout most of Napoleon's life, he was publicly a Christian and privately an atheist, and his views were mixed. He did actions both supporting and against the church. But, PaxTube tries to portray it sometimes like this. It was a central element to Napoleon's life. Like, he was constantly at odds with the church and constantly, going back and forth in his allegiance with them, and it was, that's kind of going too far. Napoleon really just kind of saw the church as a side note. He was fine with them being a part of his regime as long as they supported him. But if they didn't, he was more than happy to kick them in the teeth and tell them, and to put the Pope in prison, or put the crown of France on his own head as opposed to on the Pope's. Whereas the Pope putting on his head, as had been done in tradition. So, there was an antagonistic relationship between the two, but it really wasn't a centerpiece of Napoleon's life. And that at the end of his life, the idea that he was a little bit more religious than he was at other points and times of his life when he was living in exile really is not proof of anything other than the fact that Napoleon really just was a broken man at that point in life. So, anyways, hopefully I did a good job of picking apart some of the historical inaccuracies of his video and sifting out opinion from fact, and hopefully, this was a relatively interesting video to watch. So thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye.